Hey everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. A new release today, the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel. What's up everybody? Kyle the Drink Pro here with you yet again. Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you for liking, subscribing, sharing this video with your friends, joining me on the Patreon. Anything you can do to support the channel means the world to me. It's the reason I'm able to keep making these videos. Today, I've got a really fun one because it's a brand new release, the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel. Now, Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel has been released in September in some small markets. I shouldn't say small, in limited markets maybe, but they're going to be spreading to pretty much everywhere very soon. I was actually really surprised by the price being commanded on the secondary market for the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel because I know that it's going to be available everywhere pretty soon. Yes, it's a new release, and yes, I understand people wanting to be the first to get their hands on it, but come on guys, like, don't be paying $100 or more for a bottle that's $50 MSRP, and I don't expect to be that hard to find, frankly. It's going to be good stuff. So we hope. Because we know what to expect from Elijah Craig in a lot of ways. Heaven Hill is a pretty consistent producer. Heaven Hill has one basic bourbon mash bill that makes both Elijah Craig and their new Toasted Barrel product. It's 78% corn, 12% malted barley, and 10% rye. The Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel is being released at the same proof as standard Elijah Craig, 94. And that's not really surprising because the Toasted Barrel is essentially just standard Elijah Craig that's then finished in a separate barrel. Now, Heaven Hill worked with the Independent Stave Company, which I find that name a little ironic because the Independent Stave Company isn't that independent in the sense of they work with everybody, so they might be independent on their own, but they're not some small, unknown stave company. They're very well established in the industry. Anyway, the Independent Stave Company worked to develop a custom barrel with Heaven Hill. They used outdoor dry aging for 18 months on the staves that made out this particular barrel, which was then toasted and then flash charred. This creates a unique profile that then they dump fully finished Elijah Craig into and let it age there for a period of time. I don't think they release how long they age it. I think that's a trade secret. Now, one thing I noticed, I looked at a couple of different whiskey YouTube channels, and I saw a lot of people were comparing Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel to Old Forester 1910 or Woodford Double Oaked or Michter's toasted products. That's all well and good, but I want to compare it to standard Elijah Craig. Because most consumers are going to walk in the liquor store and say, oh, Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel, how is that compared to standard Elijah Craig? Even whiskey drinkers are going to want to know that because in their mind, they're thinking, is this the Elijah Craig profile or is it something different? I think the second step is then to compare it to other double-oaked products or other toasted finished products. But the first thing really has to be, how does this compare to others in the lineup? By the way, I'm only a little bit bitter that the Bourbon Junkies just barely beat me out on the first to market with this review, but I'm sure ours will be different, so I'm not that worried about it. You should check them out if you want to watch a different channel doing some different things, but I'm not very good at being communicative with the bourbon community. I watch a lot of the stuff that's out there, ADHD Whiskey, the Bourbon Junkies, it's Bourbon Night. You know, I watch a lot of these products, the Mash and Drum, Whiskey Tribe. I'm not really naturally talkative in those places. My natural form of communication is kind of what I'm doing right here behind the camera. And then one-on-one interactions with people. So it feels very foreign to me to jump on a live stream with one of these guys and just try to have a conversation. I probably could be a lot bigger, honestly, if I reached out to those guys and had them help me out, but it's just very unnatural. So I'm just going to keep doing me and hopefully someone will take notice. All right, so let's go ahead and pour them out. I got side by side the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel. And I've also got a regular Elijah Craig small batch to the side by side. Now, this isn't any old small batch. Unfortunately, I don't have any just standard small batch at the house. But what I do have is a sample of a South Carolina store pick. Now, both of these samples are courtesy of Nate Cooper. Big shout out to Nate for helping me get my hands on these samples. A lot of people that are able to do these reviews early are getting samples from the distillery, so I'm really glad to have great fans and patrons like Nate to help me get early access to pours that just aren't showing up in Indiana yet, frankly. I will say, just looking at the color of these, you can tell that the Toasted Barrel is a bit darker, which is not surprising. Basically the same product, except this one has been finished longer in some fresh oak. So, of course, it's going to be a little darker. It's not significantly darker, though, to my eye, which means that it shouldn't be a drastic shift away from the standard Elijah Craig profile. We'll give that a try and see how we feel. I think I'm going to nose both of them back to back, and then I'll go palate back to back, just because I think it'll be a good way to compare both elements from both pours. So let's start with the nose of the Elijah Craig standard small batch. Now this is a South Carolina store pick, so it may be a little off profile, but I expect it to be very similar. I've had several Elijah Craig store picks that weren't that dissimilar. Some were better, some were worse, but they all were pretty close to profile, so I'd be a little surprised if this one was way out of left field in terms of fitting in to the Elijah Craig profile. It's worth noting that some picks are much broader in terms of the possibilities than others. A good example of that for me is Buffalo Trace. Standard Buffalo Trace has a huge variance in terms of what a standard pick tastes like. Whereas I've had other brands, Woodford Double Oak, again, for me, is very, very similar. But I've seen several different store picks, but they didn't have as much of a band of difference. But a lot of that is just personal taste. So let's go ahead and nose this Elijah Craig. I get a very sweet vanilla, almost candy vanilla. There's a hint of caramel. There's definitely like a lemon note. There's a citrusy sharpness at the top of this. I always think about these flavors sort of like musical notes on a scale. You have your treble, your bass. I've talked about it a little bit on the channel before, but this definitely has a lot of those high notes. A lot of that cymbal is really present on the nose in this, which I like. It's kind of a fun lemony note, but it's not alcohol burn. It's not lemon pledge. It's like lemon zest or citrus. Yeah, lots of sweet aromatics on this. Like I said, a hint of that vanilla. Definitely some malt sweetness as well, and butterscotch, just a touch. Caramel's a very big flavor in this. I get a little bit of honey, a little bit of like dry, dark, like baker's chocolate, I'd say. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. Honestly, I might get even like a touch of peppermint. I always forget which spearmint or peppermint, which one is the stronger flavor, but it's the weaker of the two flavors. I get just a touch of that mintiness on this as well in the nose. Like I said before on the nose, get a little bit of the lemon, but I also get some green apple and some coconut, actually. That's a note I very rarely think I pull out of just standard whiskey, so it's kind of fun to see that in a standard Elijah Craig store pick. There is a touch of the floral note, but it seems to be more overpowered to me by the fruity character. There is an underpinning of floral, but usually for me, prominent floral notes pair more with an almost herbal bitterness. So when I smell pure flower, that fragrant floral quality doesn't pair as well or as easily with fruity sweetness. The fruity sweetness kind of dominates for my nose. Not really much nutty going on this. I get a little bit of a fresh cut oak, but it's pretty quiet. Most of the aromatics live in that subtle fruit note and then very prominent baking spice aromatics and sweet aromatics. Let's go ahead and smell the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel and see how it compares. Wow, right off the bat, big, loud, caramel, sweet, creamy goodness. It's like Werther's Originals have just been plopped into this glass and let sit there for a while. If I do a quick back-to-back, what really stands out to me is the citrus is totally gone. That citrus, that high note that's in the standard Elijah Craig is totally missing from the toasted oak. That malty sweetness, though, seems to have doubled down. It's much sweeter in a big, strong, broad sense. I think the sweetness on the standard Elijah Craig is more fruity and maybe more narrow and sharp. I talked about the sweet aromatics on the nose of the standard Elijah Craig. I feel like they're much louder. I do get sort of a graham cracker quality. It's like a hint of breadiness with a very sweet malty note and a touch of cinnamon. There's also this big, sweet, creamy, caramelized vibe. I actually think the Bourbon Junkies called it a marshmallow, and I see where they're coming from with that. But for me, marshmallows aren't as creamy as this. This is almost like sweet cream coffee creamer. I get some of those brown spices like cinnamon and clove are really prominent and they keep coming back. I really like that in a pour. See, I can definitely tell that this is Elijah Craig. I'm glad I did the side-by-side with other Elijah Craig products and not with Woodford Double Oaked or an Old Forester 1910 because that mintiness I talked about, it's subtle, but it's there on the standard Elijah Craig. And it's there on this toasted barrel Elijah Craig. And I think that's really cool. It's cool to see consistent notes throughout. The Heaven Hill mash bill and process is shining through. So even though they made this big change that does have a drastic effect, especially on those high notes, and brings out some of that creamy sweetness, it doesn't take away all of the elements that really tell you this is Heaven Hill Distillate. Distill it. Distill it. Boy, I didn't think about this until I looked at the word on a flavor wheel, but cherry. There's a definite cherry note in this in this toasted barrel. But it's a creamy cherry. If you ever had, I think it was Werther's, there was some candy company that made like a strawberries and cream or cherries and cream kind of candy. That's the vibe I get on the nose of this. And ironically, for it being in oak longer, specifically with the toasted oak, I don't get a toasted oak on the nose. Even though it is something you can pull as a scent or a flavor note from a whiskey, I don't really get that here. The notes are so much sweeter and richer that any of that subtle wood note I was finding on the original Elijah Craig is kind of taking a back seat to this big bombastic sweetness on the nose. So I'm curious if it shows up on the palate. Let's go ahead and taste the standard Elijah Craig. Whoa, and before I taste it, I'm going to need a minute to acclimate because it is very different on the nose. And coming back to it from the toasted barrel, it's almost tinny, it's sharp, it's a big shift in my experience of it. Light and sweet. It's got a little bit of a... the malt sweetness is really prominent on this, but it's very light. Maybe a hint of that lemony note again as a flavor, not as like a lemon pledge or very alcohol forward. I'm surprised by the finish on this because you get a lot of wood. More than you would expect from a bourbon in this price range. I think it's between $20 and $30. But it's got a lot of wood notes that are not overpowering and they're not bitter, which I really like. It's hard for me to find wood flavors that are strong and noticeable without being overpowering, without being too bitter. These aren't strong, don't get me wrong. But to be able to have the wood flavor without it being too bitter is a big plus. It's a big accolade, in my mind, for a bourbon. Yeah, a little vanilla, a little caramel, maybe a walnut in the mid-palate, just a hint of nuttiness. Definitely finishes with that very slight oak. Now, I talked about the minty quality on the nose for both of these pours. At least for the standard Elijah Craig, I'm getting some of this bitter herbalness in the mid-palate that I kind of associate with mint. Not all mint presents that way. Sometimes you get almost a eucalyptus flavor or even like a menthol flavor. But here I'm getting the mint that's much more like an herbal mint. It's very subtle, it's very quiet, but it's there. You can pull it out if you're looking for it. Yeah, there's definitely this almond quality in the mid-palate as well that I like. It's a great whiskey. You know, it gives you this sweetness up front. Not particularly complicated, but it's nice and sweet. Mid-palate is nutty. Finish is woody. That's great. I mean, to be able to have a relatively cheap whiskey that still takes you on a journey is really cool. It's not complex. You're not pulling a whole bunch out of it, but it's pretty good. That's what you want. If you're paying $25, $30 for whiskey, better be good. Doesn't have to be great. Okay, let's see if the toasted barrel is worth twice the price. I think the MSRP on the toasted is $50, and I've seen it for $60 or more. Retail, not even to talk about the ridiculous pricing on secondary. I know why people don't like this right away. I like it. Just put that out there right now. But if you're looking at it from an Elijah Craig perspective, it's very different. The sweetness that you get in the Elijah Craig standard is very narrow, and it's good, but it's almost like tinny, like a radio with no bass on it. This is almost all bass. This is like the car that drives by with the subwoofers banging in the trunk. The sweetness is big and rich and chocolatey, malty. Whoa, almost overwhelming if you're not ready for it, especially at the proof point. You know, this is 94 proof, right? This is 94 proof. It doesn't drink like that. Yeah, chocolate malt, and then lots of wood, a little bit of nuttiness, a little bit of, what nut is it? So I've just discovered that none of the bourbon flavor wheels or any of the tasting notes I have from really well-established authorities have more than just 3 different nut flavors. They have walnuts, almonds, and pecans. That's crap. That's crap. All of these Bookers up here have peanut or cashew or other nuts in them as well. So you can't tell me those are the only nut flavors. Maybe those are the most common, I don't know. But this has a nuttiness that I'm having trouble placing, but it's very strong in the mid-palate. That sweet chocolate cookie note, really, in the beginning of my palate into the mid-palate, is really powerful and really good. I really like that note. I like a good chocolate cookie, and that's what I'm getting off of it. It there very quickly turns into this sort of brown sugar, cinnamon, immediately into the nuttiness. And then there's this woodiness, but it doesn't linger very long. The woodiness on the finish is very short. Yeah, a little bit of black walnut, a little bit of cedar on the finish, but It's pretty short. I mean, I get a little bit of this aftertaste. Maybe it's a nuttiness, maybe it's a woodiness, but I actually got more and more interesting of a finish on this Elijah Craig store pick. So again, that's not a just standard Elijah Craig small batch, but it does tell me that standard Elijah Craig may be able to finish just as well as this. So what does that mean? At the end of the day, do you want to pay $50 for the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel or more? Maybe. If you like that kind of deep, rich note that you get from a Woodford Double Oaked or an Old Forester 1910, and you really enjoy the Elijah Craig Heaven Hill Bourbon profile, it might be worth getting. I think if either one of those is a no-go for you, I wouldn't do it, because there's enough Elijah Craig in the Toasted Barrel to make you not like it if you don't like Elijah Craig. I think that mintiness continues through. I think the sweetness is a similar kind of sweetness, even though it may have more lower base sweet in the Toasted Barrel and more higher, almost citrusy, candy sweet in the standard. It's still very clearly a Heaven Hill profile, just with this very sweet, candy, cookie-esque, rather, overlay on top of it, which makes sense, because when you finish something in a barrel, it's kind of like placing this overlay or on top of it. It's what I would have expected it to be. Is it worth $50? I would say no, personally. I think a better price point for this is around $40. Maybe they'll drop that price when the bourbon boom slows down a little bit. Right now, it's just they know it's going to sell. They could sell for $100 if they wanted to. People would still buy it. So we'll see. We'll see what time does with the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel. Right now, I would say it's worth a try. I probably wouldn't buy it if I were you. Maybe do a bottle split. I've gotten really into bottle splits lately. $25 for 375 of this. Yeah, that's worth it. Go get some jars. You can split bottles with your friends. That's what I've been doing. All right, everybody. Until next time, thank you all for joining me. Keep drinking like a professional. Cheers.